Hello there, listeners to the Bylines Network podcast. We're in the middle of the World Cup. Look at the ball. Look at the ball. Look at it. It's going to move. I'm Julian in Bristol.
I'm Chris in London, and I love that very, very brilliant reference.
And I'm Stella in Manchester.
So we have a very special anniversary coming up. Today, day of publication, something that I'm sure all our listeners and all our readers and writers and CEOs and managing directors have absolutely no knowledge of whatsoever, given the fact that most of us came from some form of insert place here for Europe. It's Brexit, everybody. It's 10 years since Brexit. And doesn't that fact make you feel old? So for those who don't know, and if you're a long-time listener of the show, I honestly don't know how you could have avoided this fact. I was born in South Africa, and I realized the other day, because South Africa are in the current World Cup, that the last time we were in it was 16 years ago. And let me tell you, those two facts alone have aged me significantly. So we thought we'd talk about the sunlit uplands that we currently live in, talk about like the day and what happened, and then just talk about everything that just did not happen since. And I'm sure that if there are any right-wing listeners, first of all, how did you find your way here? Secondly, I'm sure you're not going to get mad at this at all in any way. Where were you two on the day it happened? I sound like I'm talking like a natural disaster. Like where were you when the flood happened?
Remember where I was? I was in sixth form, a month of being 18 years old, like almost to the day, which was very upsetting because I couldn't vote. Yeah, I came home from school and we had like a knock on the door, I think, in the evening. I can't remember who it was from, to be honest. And then I remember going to a neighbour's house to watch the results and definitely not drinking alcohol because I was not 18. The weird thing I remember, I don't know if you guys remember this, there wasn't an exit poll, like in the way that you get in a general election. So we kind of would have just left there being like, who knows what's going to happen? You got to stay awake.
Well, okay, you can't freak out when I say this. I was 11.
And we're muting Stella for the rest of the meeting.
I quit.
Yeah, I was 12. No, I was 11 turning 12. So I still had a bedtime, probably. And I woke up the next morning and went to my mum and went, Mum, did we vote to leave the EU? And she said yes. And I started crying. And that's where I started getting very politically involved. And let me tell you, other 11-year-olds don't want to know what the Good Friday Agreement is. They really don't.
Well, given the fact that most of, not even like the previous, like our generation's main education for the Troubles was Dairy Girls. So that does not surprise me in any way, shape, or form. Oh, God, so I was the only one who actually cast their vote then. I keep forgetting that. No, I was home for the summer. My first year of university, I was talking with like a bunch of friends in the Doctor Who Society. Yes, I was in the Doctor Who Society about how, oh, it's probably not going to happen because every argument that the Leave campaign make, there's always like one that makes sense. But I was also working in a Weatherspoons pub during the summer, and oh God, there was this one guy who kept, every time he went to go and get more pints, he kept shouting, "Vote Leave, everybody!" Just on his way to the pub. And quite frankly, I was in the headspace of, God, I just want this to be all over.
Was it the CEO of Weatherspoons that sent that email around basically telling his employees to vote Leave?
Not just that. He used his own newsletter magazine talking about why the EU is the worst thing since Satan. He also commissioned like propaganda coasters with like lies about why the EU is evil and why we need to leave. And to this day, he still maintains that we're in a better position now than we were before. But yeah, I actually debated whether or not I needed a vote in Southampton or in my home constituency. And I realized like the day before that it didn't really matter because it's not a constituency thing. And I went to bed thinking, well, I've done all I can. We're probably going to win anyway. And then I woke up and the world was on fire.
I remember where I was when I found out. And it's not like I'd set an alarm or anything. I think my Fridays at school at sixth form that point were like my lessons were in the afternoon, so I had 3 periods in the morning so I could have a sleep in. But I woke up at like 4 or 5 a.m. or whatever time. I think it was just it must have been just before like the BBC had forecast it. So I think it was like 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. And I remember rolling over, getting my phone and putting iPlayer on in bed, and it was David Dimbleby saying, "That's it, we're out." And I was like, "Oh, damn." And I tried to stay up as long as I could without like actually feeling knackered. You couldn't really tell, I think, at the point I went to bed, which was about half 1, 2 in the morning. Yeah, woke up at 4 or 5 a.m. and was like, damn. I remember very specifically, I had a government and politics A-level class that afternoon. And because of the way my school worked, it clashed with another subject. So I had to go to another school to do that. People around my year group who were able to vote, who had turned 18, were like very vocal about their feelings supporting Brexit, because they were like, it'd be a laugh, you know, it tells the establishment that, this is the first time I'm voting, it's got to make a difference. People in my government and politics class at that school were of the same sort of mindset, quite a substantial amount. And I remember making a point, basically, when Margaret Thatcher was elected, my mum was at college and she went into school wearing black the next day, like a funeral. So I went to my A-level politics class all wearing black that day. And people were like, did you go to a funeral this morning? And I was like, no. And I mean, I tell you what, doing a politics A-level during Brexit, sort of the referendum period and everything, that was interesting.
No, what was really awkward for me was going back to university and then going to my European friends, just going, I don't know, guys, I'm so sorry.
No, but like even like my fiance, he was working in an office in Australia at the time. Their time difference is like 9 hours. So they were at work when the result came in. And he said that he had like European colleagues in his office who were like burst into tears.
Yeah, like I've seen a lot of articles since then, not just this year, but in like every year I've seen a handful of articles that keep saying people didn't realize what they were voting for. I honestly wouldn't be surprised to find out if a not insignificant number of people who voted Brexit thought they were voting a referendum on the government and thought, oh, this is not going to change anything. I just want to show I don't like David Cameron and the establishment. And yes, since then, everything that the Leave campaign came true. Sum it up, thanks everybody. We all have so much money, and the housing crisis is solved, and migration is way, way, way down.
I'm sure we'll come on to the like what you just said later on, but I also feel like maybe we're also forgetting like the absolute mess that it caused in our politics in the immediate aftermath. This is, I mean, a broader takeaway of this of Brexit as a whole for me is that like what it did was just, I think it unleashed a force in our politics which no one has been able to contain ever since, because it's just been, ever since then it's just been chaos. Like,
I mean to a certain degree, but what you are forgetting is that stable periods like Thatcher Blair eras, they're an oddity in politics, not just British politics. They're just an oddity in general. We have not had a stable period like Thatcher, what's his name, Blair, and Cameron since I think the Victorian era. Like ever since like Queen Victoria died, it's been short-term prime ministers. So Brexit just turned us back to normal in that way.
and I remember like I wasn't even working in politics at the time. I was doing volunteering with the People's Vote for quite a substantial amount of that period, which if people weren't aware of I'm assuming people who listen to the Barlands Network podcast are aware of what the People's Vote campaign was, but it was a campaign for a second referendum. There was a lot of, it was, election campaigns, Theresa May's election campaigns, the election when she decided she would win it. And then like the kid just flopped and she ended up losing her majority. And that just made everything worse.
It definitely did something to the Conservative Party as well. Like the Conservative Party was always like a pro-European party with like some rumblings, like small parts. Brexit tore it apart. We already have like aged Thatcherite conservatives who are no longer part of the Conservative Party because they don't recognise it anymore. It's utterly destroyed it. It threatened to tear apart Labour, because it was being led by a guy who was very clearly anti-Europe, that didn't want to appear anti-Europe. But
Goodness me, Jules. You know, as a Labour member since I was 16, that is a period I have blocked out of my mind, because one of the biggest frustrations I had with Jeremy and his leadership of the Labour Party was his absolute sort of almost indifference to whether or not we left the European Union. And at the time, during a lot of the debates after the vote, I was at uni, and I was surrounded by a lot of people who were very, very left wing. And I considered myself quite left wing, but there are people who are more left wing than me. And they were arguing about how we could, we could go through with Brexit, but actually make it so that that was better for working people, like working class people. And I was like, I don't understand where you're coming from with this at all, because you're essentially, and there were lots of people who were on the left of the party in Momentum, and who were basically like, no, we need to do Brexit. I know really left wing people who voted for Brexit, and it's such a weird sort of concept to me, because I think I classify myself as a socialist, but I also would never stand on a platform if I was a socialist MP at that time saying, yeah, Brexit's a good thing, we should leave the European Union, it's terrible. But at the time, it ignited this sort of thought amongst left-wing people of the EU actually isn't that great. It's this big capitalist sort of promoting entity, and we're better separating ourselves from it and going our own way as like a proper socialist government. And I can understand that school of thought, but
if you see the trajectory Jeremy Corbyn has taken with your party, which was just a dud anyway, I will admit, when that party was first announced, I did sign up to the email newsletter just to see what was going on. And there's a lot of this very academic language around imperialism, neoliberalism, neo-colonial imperial forces, which just alienates people, I think, and also feels a bit like we're all doing a bit of a USSR style historical reenactment. That's been my gripe with this sort of leftist rhetoric. So I think a lot of people on the left, if you were in university at the time, are coming from a very theoretical place about neoliberalism, neo-colonialism. But you have to look at intention versus outcome. I don't like the EU in theory of what it stands for, but to leave the EU isn't going to make my socialist utopia come true. It's actually going to do the opposite, because I think one thing, this is more of like a hunch, I feel like the EU to me kind of represents this bureaucratic style of decision making that is based in quite a boring politics, whereas the kind of direction we've gone in since we've left the EU is this very intense populist, everyone's a populist now. Like, what is going on? So I feel like leaving EU really opened the doors to that, which I don't think that right-wing populism is in a left-winger's interest, believe it or not.
no. And even like the alternatives to the populists right now are better, but still on the right. Like Peter Magyar, for example, is like the perfect example. Like, people voted for him who are aligned more with us, but they voted for Peter Magyar because he's the only choice, And it's the same with I believe the Dutch as well. Like, and most notably France. Macron has called several elections where he put himself as the not Marine Le Pen candidate, and yeah, he won. But he's still a conservative. He's just, not Marie Le Pen. And right now, we currently have a prime minister who defined himself as not the Conservatives, vote for me. And yeah, he got voted in. But what do you have other than I'm not the Tories? Because, by the way, a lot of your policies sound like you are a conservative, my friend.
I think what Stella said is right, like in terms of populism, and like everyone's a populist now. But I do genuinely think that that's because still our politics is kind of poisoned by the reasons why people voted to leave. People trying to sort of capitalize on that sentiment, which they think still exists. And like, as much as maybe the arguments about whether we should have a close relationship with Europe or keep sort of distancing ourselves continue, and the opinions on that amongst the public will change, I don't think our politics has actually dealt with the state that whole referendum campaign and the debate and the aftermath has created. It's, you've seen it with, I mean, the most recent example I can think of is like the Labour Party in government in 2024. That, like, they're a Labour government in power, supposed to be progressives, but they are pursuing this narrative about refugees, immigrants, benefit claimants, and that, I think, we all know how the Brexit campaign went. It was an othering campaign. Immigration dominated everything. Like, we're going to get God knows how many people from Turkey, etc. That style of politics that was rife during the referendum campaign, and during the sort of periods when we were trying to sort the deal out, and what we were going to leave on a Swiss deal, or a Norway deal, or a Norway deal, or whatever. That stuck, and it has influenced successive governments since. Like the Labour government, for them cracking down on refugees and immigration and benefit claimants. The Tories and Reform going, well, we are going to leave the ECHR because it's a European court and yada 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 yada. And it's like, it hasn't left. Like, the debate may be over in mainstream, the sentiment's still there that was brought up and drug up, and I think it's now ingrained in our politics, and it's so toxic. It's poisoned our politics. Like, and that's what, like what Stella was saying, everyone's now populist, even the left wing parties, because that's where people's minds are at, I think. And Brexit, I think, caused that, honestly.
As much as I don't like to say this, it's because the Brexit campaign was successful. And right now, people don't know what to do with their politics. They don't know how to appeal to people, so they just go for what works. That's why we've had pretty much Thatcherism 2.0, Thatcherism 3.0, Thatcherism 4.0 since 1990, pretty much. Brexit worked, so everyone's just doing Brexit now. Everyone's becoming a populist. Brexit campaigned successfully. Donald Trump campaigned successfully twice. That's just perfectly explainable by politicians no longer have any ideas and can't appeal to the ordinary people. They're just a bunch of overpaid public servants who have no idea how ordinary people live. So quick, do that, but not that. Like, it can only really sustain them for so long. Look at what happens to the Conservative Party. Look at what's currently happening to Nigel Farage, whose poll numbers, I am delighted to say, continue to fall. I fear it's going to happen to Labour very soon. Unless the prime minister in waiting from Manchester changes something.
I do think the reason the Brexit campaign worked so well is because they were there with the disinformation or misinformation first. And then afterwards, the whole Leave campaign was almost proving those distortions of the truth wrong, which there's that famous quote, I don't know who said it, but like, if you're explaining yourself in politics, you're losing. So I feel like every campaign since then has been predicated on that. Say something, it can be outed as a lie later, as long as you've got your voters in. But it's quite difficult to like peel back the layers on and disprove. And it's also very emotional. The kind of things that people were being told about immigration, even about like double-decker buses, what was that all about, were very emotional, whereas the Leave campaign was incredibly logical, almost to a fault, for people who maybe didn't know much about the EU and weren't already emotionally connected to the idea of the EU. So I think ever since then, or just in general, that's how campaigns are successful. It's about lying first.
I don't even necessarily think it's about, like, I don't think it's about lying. I think what it felt like the Remain campaign were doing, especially if you consider the context in which the referendum took place, it was David Cameron said, "Yes, I'm going to have I'm going to have a referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union," because the Tory party were getting smashed in European parliamentary elections and being threatened by UKIP MPs in safe seats. So he decided to capitulate and have a referendum on membership of the European Union. But that was held after years and years of austerity and public services being on their absolute knees. I'm not saying they're any better now, but it seems like maybe we've all become used to it. But it was cuts, 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 and people were really struggling. And having a major constitutional question asked at a point where a country is already in like dire straits and people are not doing well. It's like tomorrow, if there was a referendum on, I don't know, I think referendums are a messy tool, in all honesty, especially the way that we conduct them in this country, which is like a simple majority, 50 above 50% yes, for following through on that decision. Like that's the context. And he decided, no, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And the people that voted leave at the time, I don't really blame them because they'd been stomped on and kicked down for decades. That was their chance at the time to deliver something fairly consequential and deliver a bloody nose to the people who run the country. But when it comes to the campaign that Remain ran, like you say, Leave were very emotional. People take that on. Remain's campaign felt like a university lecture. These are the statistics. This is why you're wrong if you do this. And it felt they didn't explicitly say people who were voting Leave would be stupid, but that's essentially what they were saying. And it was, that quote from Michael Gove, we've had enough of experts.
I also think that bloody double-decker bus was a stroke of genius because you put it out, you make people outraged, all the people talk about it on the news about why everything it's saying is completely wrong. All the meantime, you're still showing the bus. So that message of, hey, that health service that is getting worse and worse that you rely on, we're going to give it a bunch of money if you vote for this. Yeah, people are going to vote for that. You are completely right. The Remain campaign was one of the worst campaigns that I've ever seen in my life because they had completely forgotten / weren't listening to people who were in dire straits, starving, not being able to afford to send like kids to schools with food. So yeah, I completely sympathize with them in that context of, yeah, I'm going to vote against this because screw the government who's put me in a worse situation, all for the deficits.
But it's what Stella said earlier, and I think like in terms of it links to populism, I think it emboldened people who occupied like an alternative space which wasn't in the mainstream. But like leaving the European Union until it was a discussion wasn't mainstream. And obviously, you had during the Brexit campaign some really weird people chime in and say, I back that. For example, Piers Corbyn, like the big anti-vaxxer that people probably know about, like Jeremy Corbyn's brother, right? Like that's one example. But people like him suddenly got a little bit of a voice and they carried that on. And I guess people sort of were exposed to these alternative sort of parts of society and alternative opinions they weren't necessarily familiar with, but maybe thought of themselves because people are sometimes anti-vax for reasons I can't explain because they don't like science. But it's like I've had those arguments within my family as well, and I'm not saying if you support Brexit, you're an anti-vaxxer, because I don't think it's that simple. What it did was sort of embolden these sort of previously marginalized groups and opinions, and they've just stuck around. And if you ask me what I think the biggest impact Brexit has had on our country, I wouldn't say migration, because net migration peaked in the years following Brexit. The years after we'd left the European Union, sorry, net migration peaked like in its highest number that we've ever had after leaving the European Union. It was more than that. It was more than that. It was June 2023 and it peaked at 906,000. So, but if we talk about, like trade, for example, how many trade deals have we done? Not that many. But like the economic impact also, yes, but if you look at stats, it's not as drastic, it's not as immediate, but it's there. The immediate impact that I think Brexit has had on our country is that it's entrenched this culture war, divisive, horrific politics, because that's just where that campaign was. It's where the people who led that campaign were, and they realized that's what gets me attention, that's what gets me power, that's what gets me support. And from and sort of amplified by these voices that were marginalized before. I mean, look at like the last 2 weeks, we've literally had race riots. Like we've had race riots for consecutive years. That did not happen before. It didn't happen. And it's the same people who were at the forefront of the Brexit campaign being like, go out, display cold rage, be angry, be upset, be frustrated, Tommy Robinson backed Brexit. He backed Nigel Farage, and then Nigel Farage was like, oops, no, don't want anything to do with you. But that genuinely, forget the economics, forget the trade, forget migration. The lasting impact I think Brexit has had on our politics, and it will be here for a long time, and we're all experiencing it, is this divisive, horrific, othering culture war politics where minorities are, made to feel terrified. Like in Belfast, there was there was a house that had student nurses from, I think it was Uganda, and people went protesting after the knife attack that happened there, and they knew that people who lived there weren't white, so they burned the house down. What century am I? What decade am I supposed to be living in right now, where that happens, and the people who incite that violence are elected politicians in our House of Commons, and they don't face any punishment? Or that's what Brexit has done, in my opinion. That's the ultimate damage. It's not the trade deals, it's not migration, it's not the economy. It's that is what it has left.
It's conspiratorial thinking, isn't it? And I think, especially around the migration arguments in the Leave campaign, it had like a conspiratorial undertone that, those in Europe, they want to mess up our country and take all our money and get loads of immigrants in here and all of this. And it's all very intensely conspiratorial. What's interesting about conspiracies is once people are proven wrong, they don't stop being conspiratorial. They just go further into it. So I think a really good, what you're talking about, Chris, of this like anti-migrant rhetoric, a really good kind of case study into this is how the typical people who are anti-migrant now think of Polish people and Poland. 10 years ago, this is what fueled a lot of the, Leave rhetoric. It was a very like anti-Polish, anti-Eastern Europe sentiment. Now they've been proven wrong. Polish people weren't ruining the UK, because I don't know how many Polish people are in the UK, but I don't imagine there are loads of new Polish people coming into the UK. So they've been proven wrong, but now the rhetoric's changed of, Polish people are all right, actually. And when I was researching like anti-migrant sentiment on Facebook, they love Poland now and they love Polish people. But it just shows they'll never not believe in this conspiracy because it is so emotional. It's really hard to de-radicalize someone from that point. They will just latch on to even more people and kind of leave. They're very happy to leave certain people out of it, even though they were so upset about it 5-10 years ago.
The problem is, I don't know what the solution to this is, unfortunately. Like, since we're going on thought experiments, you and the listeners are gonna have to go with me on this one, because it sounds weird, but go with me. There is a point to prove. There was, God, I can't remember his name, but he was one of those like people who would go on television to prove that psychics weren't a thing. He did a speech where he told an entire audience of like-minded people, you cannot definitively disprove that Santa Claus doesn't exist. To a believer anyway. You cannot prove that Santa Claus doesn't exist because you can point out all the things that everybody knows to be true. We've been to the North Pole several times. We haven't found anything. Well, obviously, he keeps his factory invisible to the naked eye. reindeer can't fly. Well, obviously, he uses like a magic recipe passed down from Santa to Santa to make it happen. Once people start believing a conspiracy theory, no matter what you do, you can't get them out of it because they'll just find another excuse to tell you why it's real. It's why all the people who believe in the great replacement theory are still in there, despite the fact that is very obviously an anti Semitic racist conspiracy theory.
But I also, I don't necessarily think it would be fair to just say that, Brexit unleashed this undercurrent of racism because I think this country has always had a problem with racism. It's just that the conversations around Brexit, so like it amplified discussions about migration, that has now translated not just to migration but skin color. When you look at conversations like literally in the last few months about two-tier policing, and the conversations we had, over the last few years have been about how institutions, specifically, for example, like the Metropolitan Police, are institutionally racist. They were found to be institutionally racist. But the thing is, that's a fact. But we now have the same politics and in people who are involved in the Brexit campaign going, no, we treat white people unfairly because the police are harsher to them. That's just not the case, even today. And it doesn't even just stop at people's skin color or their race. It goes to if you're gay, if you're trans. There's a target on your back now because you are this other group.
It's also like it's seeping into like politicians as well. Like, keep in mind that we do currently have a published book by a former prime minister with the title 10 Years to Save the West. Oh, and of course, and a YouTube channel which has gotten funding from American billionaires about how there was like a conspiracy to remove said prime minister by the deep state, and it's failing so hard, and I love to see it. But the fact that that even has some kind of audience really says a lot about where we are as a people.
It just makes me laugh because I work in politics and like I work around MPs. The conspiracies that people accuse these MPs of is so out. They couldn't tie their own shoelaces in a lot of cases, some members of parliament. A lot of them can't work out how to convert a Word document to PDF.
Well, conspiracy theories are based on one fact, and that's our politicians are smarter than us and therefore have, agency and plans in the deep state and all that. When in actuality, and this fact actually might be more terrifying than what they're thinking of, politicians are just as stupid as you and me, and they're running the country.
Or maybe that's what they want you to think.
Stella, I will mute you permanently.
But like I've had conversations with people I know, and they come out with these really outlandish theories about the government have done X, Y, Z, and it often relates to migration. And like, I don't know if you guys have read some of these horrific theories, like white replacement theory. Like there are people who genuinely believe that the government let refugees in to replace the white population. Okay, well, let's just completely forget the fact that a lot of asylum claims are refused. They can't work unless they have their application sort of pending for a year. There's a million and one arguments.
And again, we let in the fewest amount of refugees compared to our European allies. Even Ireland takes more refugees than we do, and we're in the way of them.
But at the same time, it's like if you work with government departments and ministers and MPs in the way that I do, you would realize there is not the faintest possibility that there could be any type of conspiracy like that because people can't get their mouth shut and they can't even tie their own shoelaces. Okay,
so where do we think Brexit is going to go in the future? Because I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, it's not looking good. It's not looking good, Jeff. Like, I remember I predicted to a colleague in 2016 that Brexit is such a bad idea that when it eventually happens, we'll just end up rejoining in 10 years. Now, I've got until 2030 for that to happen, so there is still time. But I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't think that's coming true. Just with the fact alone that we currently have a Labour government and supposedly a socialist or a left-leaning, not left of centre, left-leaning guy coming in to take Keir Starmer's position, who previously campaigned for Remain. I don't think that's happening because the Andy Burnham, the would-be Prime Minister-elect, said recently that he's not going to focus on Brexit, despite the fact I think we have firmly established after however long this episode ends up being, that all the problems we are currently facing go back to Brexit. He's not. He said he's not going to focus on it.
Also, I saw a report today that said if he did add that to the manifesto, it would increase the Labour voting intention by 10% of the surveyed people about Brexit. So it would be good. It would be good for Labour.
Again, take polls with a pinch of salt. But I mean, look, there is some basis in that because, like, the Greens are currently the most pro rejoin part. I think that's fair to say, right? The Greens are one of the most pro rejoin parties in Parliament right now, and they're currently like in the lead with the, well, not the lead, but they've currently gotten like a big boost because of that.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say the Greens are the lead rejoining party. Like the Lib Dems, like they've been really, like, most of their membership from day one, they're consistent. And maybe they're not shouting about it as loudly now, but they've been very consistent, and they are a very big party in the House of Commons at the moment. Okay, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I think Brexit still dominates our politics, but no one talks about it in the way they should. So, like, it's almost like now people are scared to talk about it because they think if they say, like, the Labour leadership election, for example, the pending, I should say, pending Labour leadership election, I feel like the people in the Labour Party who've tried to sort of signal that they're going to try and challenge Keir Starmer, even they've not sort of said anything about Brexit. And for example, West Streeting is one of the biggest stallers for.
Incorrect. West Streeting has actually said that he would seek to rejoin.
Well, colour me shocked. I think people are too scared to talk about it because if you risk talking about the impact it's had on the country, then you risk having a stupid amount of attack going, well, you're going against the British people's will. And that's we talked about emotions earlier. That's quite an emotional, powerful argument, regardless or not of whether the public are still in the same place as they were.
One last point for me, particularly since one of the chief Brexit negotiators, who previously said, "Oh, if Britain wants to come back, they'll be welcomed with open arms." I saw a report like yesterday saying Brits will be met with suspicion. I think he was the exact word he used because it's fair.
I do think us Brits suffer from a good old exceptionalism. I think that became very apparent after Brexit. People going, "What do you mean I can't have my second house in Spain?" And it's like, well, it's not just about us, it's about our relationship to Europe. And I do think the process of I think there's how many countries, like some countries who are waiting to be considered membership. It's not like we just go front of the queue and they'd be like, right, go on through. Just because we're British, that's not how life works. So yeah, I think a lot of the discussion day to day kind of assumes that the EU would just be like, yeah, sure, come back.
Like right now, negotiations to join the EU have just reopened up for Ukraine, who is currently fighting for their right to be recognized as European. Depressing fact of the matter is, I don't see us rejoining, period. Definitely not by 2030. 2050, we're going to have to wait and see, aren't we? Anyway, listeners, sorry to end on such a dour tone, but we do hope that you found this episode interesting. I've been Julian in Bristol.
I've been Chris in London.
And I've been Stella in Manchester.